Listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Bernie fed on being the guy.
They always wanted to please everybody. They didn't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
And the choice he made was he could live with himself as a liar much more easily than he could live with himself as a failure.
All right, everybody, that is a trailer from a new Netflix documentary. It is out today. It's about Bernie Madoff, as you might have guessed. It's entitled Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street. It was nearly 14 years ago that Madoff pled guilty to 11 felony counts against him, securities fraud, money laundering, and perjury. And I got to say, Tim, we talked about this yesterday. For some, seeing Sam Bankman-Fried walking into the courthouse in Lower Manhattan yesterday, charged with fraud as well, easily brought back some memories of Madoff. Not apples to apples, but nonetheless kind of took us back there.
We've certainly over the last few weeks heard those comparisons. Well, someone who's talked with Madoff after his massive Ponzi scheme was uncovered and before he did pass away in 2021, of course, is Jim Campbell, host of the nationally syndicated radio show Business Talk with Jim Campbell, also the author of Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history. Jim is included in the new Netflix documentary and joins us via Zoom from Greenwich, Connecticut right now. Jim, good to have you with us. Really good to have you with us this afternoon. Why do you think, more than a decade following this massive crime, there still remains so much interest in it?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you, Carol and Tim, for having me on. And first off, there's interest because FBF happened to go down right before the documentary comes out. There are a lot of similarities. But, at the heart, this is an age-old, simple morality tale. Why would a guy who was brilliant, who had a legitimate business worth at $1.3 billion, build simultaneously the biggest single criminal enterprise on Wall Street through this Ponzi scheme over 40 years?
You're talking about Madoff right now, just for clarification.
I'm talking about Bernie. Yeah, and it's the kind of Shakespearean drama that has always enraptured people. And again, here's a guy who betrayed his own sons, who betrayed his wife, who betrayed his Jewish community. 85% of the victims were Jewish or charities, something that's a sacrilege within the Jewish community to rip off a fellow person of the Jewish faith. And it's literally that kind of a story. And SBF brings similar kind of hubris, that he built this thing and somehow vaporized overnight $32 billion of market value because his dog ate his homework, which doesn't even work in fifth grade. And then you find out, no, rather, it's a pretty sophisticated fraud as well. And people are just always enraptured by something they initially trust. They may not understand it, but they believe in it. And then they find out it's all fake.
Well, it's interesting as we talk about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, Jim, and I think about Madoff. Like, what happens, do you think, having had conversations, right, and a lot of correspondence between yourself and Bernie Madoff, what is it that happens? Do they set out as true and ethical individuals on a mission, and then something goes terribly wrong, and they think they're going to truly catch up, and they just never do?
That's a great question, because it's what you think could be the only explanation for Madoff. And he gave me a story like that. Jim, I'm running this great legitimate business, which it was, and it was very ethically run, never screwed its clients, always got them the best price in his market making business. So you would think, something happened. I lost some money like a gambler. I'm going to double down. We'll do a little Ponzi. No one will ever notice when I get it back. But here's the thing. He's running simultaneously to this business worth $3 billion in and of itself at the peak. He's building on the 17th floor, 2 floors below, behind locked doors, with ancient technology and high school graduates, this Ponzi scheme at the same time. And in Bernie's case, the psyche is not so much greed. It's that I've got to be the go-to guy. I've got to be the guy that everybody turns to. I've got to deliver. In fact, like many narcissists or sociopaths, and Joe Berlinger, who is the director of the Netflix, has spent his time with Jeffrey Epstein, Ted Bundy, these kinds of folks, and he sees the similar lack of empathy, the lack of remorse, the narcissism, and it's at the heart of this. SBF, I think, also believes that he's a fundamentally altruistic guy. He was in that altruistic effect, and yet you look underneath what was going on there, and there was a lot of fraud. And the worst thing you can do on Wall Street is commingle client money with firm money, which on the street is stealing their money.
We should note that Sam Bankman-Fried has pleaded not guilty,
right,
and is still awaiting trial, which we anticipate will happen come October of this year, Carol.
Right, and I should note I was quoting from the allegations in the charges.
Hey, one thing I think is interesting too, that once again though, Jim, we have oversight systems, big financial systems, that were certainly in Bernie Madoff's case, at some point you wondered, didn't somebody say, isn't this too good to be true? Even Samuel Bankman-Fried, I felt like there was a whole investment community that just wanted to buy into it and didn't want to, FOMO in many ways. Do you blame the system too, the infrastructure that's out there? I
would say that this was a complete systemic failure.
Which one, SBF or Madoff or both?
Well, there'll be a little about both. I'll get to SBF, but in the case of Madoff, the SEC had 5 different shots at him and never uncovered the Ponzi scheme. In fact, they kept reinvestigating him for what they cleared him of, and he clearly had a tremendous level of trust that he captured with the regulators and his investors. I never found people who understood what his strategy was, this split strike conversion that's actually conceptually very simple and therefore totally implausible, that it would mirror the market to a 95% correlation and yet never went down. Makes no sense. SBF sent $73 million to politicians, 92% of whom were Democrat, and he had on his payroll as consultants ex-CFTC, who is, as you know, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission that has oversight power. So you have regulatory capture here by 2 guys that built great reputations, which is a similarity, and the system failed. On the hedge fund Wall Street side, these feeder funds, remember, they feed their money to hedge fund managers. Their only job is essentially due diligence. This guy is real. This matches your portfolio. Boom, we put the money there. He passed all of his fees on to them. In return, they weren't allowed to do any due diligence. That's a huge abrogation of fiduciary responsibility.
Well, we are so grateful to have some time with you, Jim. We have run, though, out of time, but so appreciate you weighing in. Jim Campbell, host of the nationally syndicated radio show Business Talk with Jim Campbell. His book, Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. Check out the new Netflix documentary as well.